everyone, welcome to the March 22nd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Krug Milkowski, and this week we're taking a look back at last weekend's racing from around the country. I think the only graded stakes that were run took place at Oaklawn on Saturday, the Grade 3 Essex and the Grade 3 Whitmore, the former going a mile and a 16th, the latter going 6 furlongs. We'll talk about those races at the top of the show, but there was some interesting racing taking place at other venues, though not exactly graded stakes. At the fairgrounds, we had a trio of allowance races that all featured horses with some reputations coming back off layoffs. Clariere's victory last Wednesday is something that we'll definitely mention, including a couple of others that got big speed figures going sprint distances. At Aqueduct, we saw a couple of stakes last weekend, a New York bred stakes on Sunday and the Cicada on Saturday. At Gulfstream Park, there were a couple of maiden races that for the 3-year-olds that are worth discussing. In addition to that, 2 stakes races that we'll mention on their Saturday card, and then we'll finish things up by taking a brief stop at Santa Anita and Turfway. Santa Anita on Sunday, they ran the sensational star with a performance by the very quick Brickyard Ride. We'll dissect that at the end of the show. But Craig, we're going to start things off at Oaklawn. Kind of a slow week in racing, but I thought we saw a couple of nice closing performances on this Oaklawn card on Saturday.
Yeah, it was really nice. And I mean, how can you not love a horse like Rated R Superstar in the Essex, a 9-year-old? I believe actually ran his career best speed figure from us. So yeah, it was some good races. I will say I'm really glad that we stuck with Aqueduct for the forecast, because I don't think I did very well in either one of these stakes races. But I think they were some well-deserving winners with some pretty good performances.
Yeah, let's start off with that 9-year-old victory by Rated R Superstar in the Grade 3 Essex, a race that I believe he's won in the past. I think it was not a graded stakes when he won it, I think 2 years ago. But as you were saying, I mean, it's pretty nice to see a horse like this. It's probably getting towards the tail end of his career, achieve this kind of victory. And I didn't think he lucked into it at all, Craig. I mean, it's not like this was a blazing pace that he closed into. He was just much the best.
Yeah, he was, and I want to give congratulations to local connections here in Danny Caldwell. He's from Oklahoma. I believe I heard this was actually his first graded stakes win as an owner, so really nice for him. He's a perennial leading owner here and at the Prairie Meadows at times, so just a guy that loves the game and really supports the game. And he reached in and claimed this horse as I believe he was 8 years old at the time, for $50,000, and has really turned him back around and got him into his best form. He ran a 122 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. And this is a horse that's just kind of fascinating to go back through his past performances. When I originally heard about the first graded stakes win, I thought it was for the horse. But he actually has won a couple others. One was the Ben Ali, which was a few years ago at Keeneland. But he actually won the Carryback, a Grade 3 at Gulfstream, as a 3-year-old. So he's been running good races for a long time. As you say, it's not like he got a great setup in here. The pace was just, I would say, kind of moderate. It's certainly none of the fractions are in red. Even a little bit on the slow side. So big effort from him, and maybe we'll see him in the Oaklawn Handicap next time out. I don't see why they wouldn't give it a shot.
Yeah, it is pretty neat to go back to the beginning of this horse's career. As a 2-year-old in 2015, he actually ran 3rd in the Breeders' Futurity behind Brody's Cause and Exaggerator, and then he went on to finish off the board in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile that year, which was won by Nyquist. It's crazy to think that all of those horses now have horses running on the track. There probably was a son of Nyquist running on this card at Oaklawn on Saturday. I didn't look it up, but yeah, it's just pretty neat that he's still in action and performing at the top of his game. And yeah, as you were kind of getting at, he made a really nice run to take this race over, because it's not like the pace was that fast. I didn't think that Plainsman had a big excuse. I mean, he was the actual second choice in this race behind the other Brad Cox trainee, Warriors Charge, but Plainsman was coming off that victory last time in the Razorback, and I thought he got a good trip and just couldn't quite seal the deal. You could see coming around the far turn that Rated R Superstar was building up a lot of momentum, and he just continued that closing run through the stretch. And when you look at his TimeformUS pace figure line, you can kind of see that it's not like he got a quick pace to run into. He just made a big middle move move past the half mile pole to get into contention, and that momentum carried him to a clear victory.
Yeah, that was a huge move. His pace figure actually went from a 90 at the half mile to a 117. So that's what got the job done. Because when you have a deep closer, you don't want to save it for the stretch. You got to get that position before you get there. And good on David Cabrera for being able to do it. And yeah, just finish it off. And it's not like he got up to win by a nose. He was drawing away from the field.
Yeah, as you were saying, it does make for an interesting Oaklawn handicap, which I believe will be run in 4 weeks' time, or maybe a little bit more than that. I think they shifted around that schedule at Oaklawn a little bit. But typically there are some shippers in that race, so we'll see if that comes up tougher than some of the local preps. Obviously, as I said, Plain's been a bit of a disappointment. Thomas Shelby did not break that sharply in this race, so he had to rush up a little bit, but it's not like the pace was that fast, so I don't want to give him that big of an excuse for having to rush up to set the pace in this race. He just didn't run quite as well as he did in his prior start.
Yeah, and I would say that obviously the big disappointment in this race was Warriors Charge, who had seemed to regain his best form in an allowance race last time. He ran a really big TimeformUS speed figure in the upper 120s. But bettors went a bit overboard here, making them 3-2. They probably saved me some money because I was ready to back him, but not at that price. And he just really did no running with no excuse. He's got to be a frustrating horse because when he runs huge. But so he disappoints a lot more often than he gets the job done.
In the other graded stakes at Oaklawn Park on Saturday, the recently renamed Grade 3 Whitmore going 6 furlongs, we saw another big late run to victory as the Larry Jones-trained Bob's Edge went from last to first to get it done, and last to first just in the span of the final quarter mile as he came into the stretch, trailing the field, but he was able to pass them all to get up for victory. Though, Craig, despite what the pace looks like, this was a race that completely fell apart as far as the top two finishers go.
It did. It isn't a race that has any coded fractions. None of them are in red. But when you look at the pace figures early, they were in the 130s. The only thing that kept them from being red is the way that the closers were able to finish off the race with a nice run. Because, for example, had Greeley and Ben and Hollis finished first and second with their speed figures, it would have been in red. But I thought the closers ran well. This wasn't an ideal setup. I just think it's probably a race that isn't as good as the grade 3 rating it got based on the horses that were in there. And, you know, I'm not sure. It just seems like not the strongest group at Oaklawn in these sprint races this year. Do want to give a shout out to Greeley and Ben, who just shows up and seems to run his race every single time out. This field was a little deeper than what he's used to, and he wasn't able to get the job done. But he was able to put away the Hollis, who I believe was the favorite or second choice in here. I can't remember. He dueled with him and put him away. Just couldn't hold off those closers.
Yeah, I think Hollis was the big disappointment in this race. He's a horse that's able to pop a big speed figure from time to time, but he's just not at all reliable, especially when they try to step him up in class into these tougher spots. He's not always able to make that jump. And coming to mid-stretch, it looked like Hollis was taking this race over as if he was going to win it, but he just hit a wall in the last furlong, and he had actually put away Greeley and Ben, and then Greeley and Ben came back at him. That just kind of shows that Hollis really couldn't finish off this race. And it set it up for that late close of Bob's Edge, and I don't want to take anything away from this horse. Like you were saying, he got a good pace setup to run into. It wasn't a fantastic pace setup. He just had the best late kick of any of these, and it seems like this horse has really turned the corner and come back as an improved 4-year-old for Larry Jones. He's now 2 for 2 at Oaklawn this winter since returning for his 4-year-old season. Like you were saying, he's going to have to run some faster speed figures if he's going to stay relevant in the sprint division later in the year, but this is definitely the way that you want to start off your season.
Yeah, I mean, he's still a young 4-year-old. He's improving his numbers every time out. So why not in a division that doesn't look terribly strong right now? Yeah, he's got to be right there with some of them. I do want to mention with Hollis, he's got, as you say, we were talking about we're rated our superstar scrolling back through the PPs. He's a really interesting horse in that very rarely would I make much of a distinction between 5.5 and 6 furlongs. But it's like night and day with this horse, the results when he tries that extra half furlong. Nearly all his wins, and definitely all of them lately, have come at 5.5 and 5 furlongs. I think maybe once he dead heated for the win at 6 furlongs when he barely held on for that co-share. And it just seems like he's a horse who is very specific to where he's going to run his best, and it's not quite at 6.
Yeah, for sure. Stamina is not his strong suit. Let's stick with the deep closers and head on over to the fairgrounds, where last Wednesday they ran an allowance race for the fillies and mares, which featured the 4-year-old debut of Clairiere, who was among the top 3-year-old fillies when she was competing last year in a series of Grade 1 races in that division. She came back off the layoff here, Craig, and just did what she was expected to do.
Yeah, and I got to say, I was impressed. She got a 115 speed figure, which is decent. She's run better in the past, but she, as you said, she did everything she was expected to do. She had a solid pace to close into. She kind of lagged behind it, but she just blew the field away in the stretch. That 115's got to set her up for a return to stakes action, and it's always good to see these fillies come back at 4 and maintain their good form. So look forward to seeing her. She's always going to be a horse who's a little bit pace dependent with her running style when she moves into better company, but she's certainly a good one.
Yeah, I saw some chatter on social media after the race, people saying that she had a troubled trip here. I didn't see that at all. I thought that she moved into the part of the race that was really slowing down around the far turn, and she probably advanced a little bit more quickly than Joel Rosario was anticipating the race would come back to her, so she had to just pause in traffic ever so slightly at the quarter pole, but I mean, she followed horses into the lane, angled out, and like you were saying, she just ran away from this field that was overmatched, and she won by over 6 lengths, did so under minimal encouragement. She got a little goofy in the late stages. She swapped back over to her left lead, had her ears pricked. Look, she was looking around in the final furlong, so definitely a horse that won with something left, and like you were saying, this should set her up perfectly to step up back into stakes company. Just seems like a horse that, if she takes that natural step forward from 3-year-old to 4-year-old, and she can build on some of the speed figures that she earned last year, she's going to be a force in this division. Let's move on to another allowance race run this past week at Fairgrounds. From Friday's card, this was a 6-furlong event won by the returning Nashville. And Craig, this has to be a frustrating horse for the connections, because when he gets things his own way on the front end, he looks like a Grade 1 caliber horse. He just has this brilliant speed that he flaunts, but it's been a struggle for him when he gets some pressure, though that was not an issue on Friday. He got no pressure in this race as his main rival Long Weekend failed to break from the gate, and that allowed Nashville to strut his stuff.
Yeah, he does seem to be obviously a need-to-lead type, and I'll be honest, I had kind of written him off after his return when the aforementioned Hollis beat him, who we were talking about back in the Whitmore Stakes. And that day he got an easy lead. The pace was slow, and he just couldn't hold him off. And then when he returned in that small stakes, I think it was the King Cotton at Oaklawn Park, he basically had no chance. So, I mean, that was a race I give him an excuse. I say he had no chance because he just was blown up at the break and had to rush up and get the lead, and there was just no way he was going to be able to do that against stakes horses. In this spot, as you say, Long Weekend, who looked like really the only horse who could challenge him up front, did not break well. That may have aided him in getting second, to be honest, because he didn't duel with Nashville. But Nashville was just free and clear, and not often you see horses in front by over 6 lengths after a quarter mile in the sprint race. But he basically maintained that margin all the way to the wire. He got a 123 TimeformUS speed figure. So certainly a big number. I mean, it was 5 points higher than what we saw in the Whitmore Stakes. But I do think you still have to question what will happen when this horse faces more early speed. Now, that's not an easy task because he's certainly fast. But, I mean, his pace figures were in the 120s. He would have had to go a lot faster to lead the Whitmore. So it's always a little bit more complicated than just looking at that 123.
Yeah, I think I misspoke a little bit. He was coming off a 7-week layoff, which is not much of a layoff these days, as he did run just previously at the end of January in that King Cotton, as you were saying. And I think when you look at his PPs, Craig, it kind of stands out, at least to me, that his 4 victories, he's had big margins on his field around the far turns. I think he was up by 6 lengths at the far turn call of this race. And when he won the Perryville, it was the same thing. When he won the allowance race at Keeneland, similar. His maiden victory at Saratoga, he just ran a field off its feet. When he has horses breathing down his neck, he just seems like he gets really faint-hearted and throws in the towel. Those races probably featured slightly faster paces, but he's a naturally fast horse that's never going to go slowly on the front end. So it just seems like he wants to be that free-running type where there's nobody challenging him. And Long Weekend failing to get out of the gate in this race, I think, really changed the complexion. And I would have been fascinated to see what would have happened if Long Weekend had broken, because I actually thought Long Weekend ran pretty well here, considering that he missed the break, was last early, had to advance on the far turn, actually was finishing up pretty well. Not that he had to run a big race to beat everybody else in this field, but he had never been the type to pass horses before, so I thought he ran well for second. It just makes me wonder, what would Nashville have done if Long Weekend had been chasing him early? I anticipate it would have been a different result, because I have very little faith that Nashville can put away another horse that challenges him for the lead.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a tough call. Maybe he's just so fast he could have frustrated Long Weekend, but he did run well in defeat, given the break that he had, and kind of showed a new dimension, because he was much further back than he usually runs well from, as much as 10 lengths at one point. As you say, there wasn't a whole lot in the rest of the field that we're going to tangle with either of these two.
Another sprint race on last weekend at Fairgrounds that achieved a pretty nice speed figure was from Saturday's card, going the 5.5 furlongs on the turf. The returning Bound for Nowhere came back off a layoff for Wesley Ward and got back to the winner's circle. Craig, this is a horse that I think is always running off a layoff. He rarely puts starts back to back, but this was the start to his 8-year-old season. I would imagine Wesley Ward has some bigger targets for him later in the year. He's a horse that they've shipped over to Royal Ascot in the past. They've tried some bigger grade ones before, but he got the job done as expected here.
Yeah, we've talked about him several times before. That this wasn't the strongest field coming in. He looked like the best horse, but I mean, there were some decent turf sprinters, but he's the kind, as opposed to a horse like Rated R Superstar, who's 9 and run 58 times. I just can't get too excited about a horse like this, because you never know where he's going to show up and when he's going to show up. And when he makes the PPs, great, I'll handicap it, and he's always going to be a force. He ran a 118 speed figure on this day, which would win a lot of turf sprint stakes races, but he's the kind I just don't get excited about.
Yeah, I think he's run in Keeneland's Shakertown for, I want to say, 4 years in a row, and I believe he's won a couple of those. So you'd imagine that's on the schedule this year. That'll be run probably in about 4 weeks, 3 weeks. So that would be a pretty quick turnaround for him if Wesley Ward is able to get him ready for that race. But I would imagine a race like that could be on the schedule for him. Watching this race, I would have liked to see him finish a little better, because the pace was on the slow side and there was kind of cavalry charging behind him, trying to chase him down the lane. And maybe John Velasquez was easing up a little bit in the late stages, but it just seemed like he wasn't running through the wire the way that I might have wanted to see him do. So maybe he's a horse that could be losing a step late in his career. He didn't have the strongest 2021 campaign, even though he did achieve that Shakertown win back in April. So we'll see what we get from him when he tries tougher foes next time. But as you said, he's one that I'll assess when I see how the race comes up.
Yeah, this was actually his 18th career start, and as an 8-year-old, when you look through his PPs, 9 of those came when he was a 2 and 3-year-old. So since he turned 4, he's basically matched those same numbers in 5 racing seasons. So obviously he's got issues, and not knocking Wesley Ward. He obviously knows what he has and is able to keep him coming back year after year. He actually won the Shakertown that you mentioned off a very long layoff. I believe it was last year, when his previous race had been a narrow loss in the Shakertown the year before. So that race was run a little bit later, but it was still nearly a year between starts. So he's certainly one that got to keep the barn busy, I would imagine.
Let's move on to Aqueduct, where they ran a couple of stakes races this past weekend. The feature on Sunday was the 1 mile Haynesfield for the older New York breds. This race was supposed to be the rematch between Lobster and My Boy Tate after they had kind of traded decisions across the wire in their last couple of starts, though My Boy Tate was disqualified out of his one victory over Lobster. But Craig, they really weren't factors in this race. They went off as the first and third choice. I'm surprised that My Boy Tate didn't take that much money on this spot, but Lobster just kind of got run off his feet by the winner, Water's Edge, who was aggressively handled early by Jorge Vargas, and he just put them all away to win this race pretty easily by over 4 lengths.
Yeah, you always got to beware of the improving horse, and he was certainly that. His speed figures have been gradually improving over time, up to that 115 he ran last time. I believe this was your selection in the race. You did a nice write-up on it, and you had this one pegged well. He ran another 115 TimeformUS speed figure, and just a good effort from him. He's going to be a horse who clearly is going to be dangerous in these New York bred stakes race division.
Yeah, this is a horse who had shown a lot of promise going all the way back to his career debut at Belmont last June, when he was second by just a neck to American Revolution when that horse was coming off a layoff in his first start for Todd Pletcher. And whereas American Revolution just got sent right into stakes company and advanced pretty quickly, David Donk took the slow and steady path with Water's Edge. He allowed him to race through all of his New York bred allowance conditions. He stretched him out in distance very gradually, even out to 1.125 miles in his prior start. And I think the cutback to the 1 turn mile really worked for him. And I think that patient approach paid off with this horse because he had some ups and downs at different points, had a trouble breaking through the starting gate in one of his races, but he always runs well. He's a hard trier. He's never been out of the exacta in 8 career starts, and it just seems like he's got him firing on all cylinders right now, and I would imagine he's going to be a new force in this New York bred stakes division moving forward.
Yeah, and he's got some options too, because as you said, he ran at 1.125 miles and ran just as well. And with his kind of speed, I'd almost say he may find some easier spots going that distance because you don't have to quite go quite as fast early, and he's already proven he can handle it. So a lot of options for David Donk with this one.
The feature race on Saturday's card at Aqueduct was the Cicada, a race that Craig and I handicapped on the forecast last week. And Craig, a good call by you on the winner, though I can't imagine that you thought you'd ever get anywhere near that 6-1 price on Lady Scarlet. I thought she'd vie for favoritism in the race. I think I had her as the co-second choice on the morning line. The bettors, though, aside from you, just were not interested. She got the trip that I think we expect her to get, set up right outside the 2 speeds, and she proved much the best.
Yeah, I don't know what the morning line maker was thinking here. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea how this horse went off 6-1. Apparently, we don't have nearly as big a following as I thought, because for once, sometimes we actually get a winner and things don't really play out how we think they were, but this was one that pretty much mapped out exactly how we talked about on the show. I know you didn't dislike this horse. You just preferred another one. And I have no idea how she went off at such a big price. And she actually ran even better here, improving her speed figure quite a bit from that 104 last time to the 111. Showed a little more versatility, being able to sit off of the speed. And just what a really nice claim by Mike Maker, because, it's you got to remember, these are just 3-year-olds in March, and she ran a 111. So very dangerous sprinter going forward, given her high cruising speed. And now she just really finished off this race. It was never in doubt.
Yeah, you don't see too many horses get claimed for $150,000, which is what she was taken for at the end of November. But she's now got 2 victories in a row for Mike Maker, both in races with nice purses, that last one at Oaklawn Park and this $100,000 Cicada Stakes. So she's certainly paying back that purchase price, and it seems like there are going to be some graded stakes options for her in the future based on the 111 TimeformUS speed figure that she got for this race. The one thing that I'll say about this Saturday card at Aqueduct is it did feel to me like horses with early speed had a slight edge. We did not see that much closing going on, especially in some of these shorter races. Horses that were able to stay out of the kickback really seemed to have an advantage. I know this is something that Maggie Wolfendale was saying, kind of watching horses on the racetrack, that the kickback was really intense and tough on closers on Saturday. So I think that helped a horse like Lady Scarlet, who was able to stay 3 wide out in the clear the entire way. And the horses that came back to the winner's circle clean without a lot of dirt on them were typically the ones that were successful on Saturday. So maybe something to just keep in mind as you watch horses run back from this card. Craig, I thought the runner-up Monshun ran pretty well off the layoff for Ray Handel. Didn't think she was great value, getting bet down to 8-5 in this race off that long layoff, but she certainly ran an improved race, and she could take a step forward out of this for sure.
Yeah, she's a fast horse, no doubt. As I mentioned on the forecast, Ray Handel is not one that generally has his horses cranked up first off the layoff, and I expected her to be maybe pointing a little bit down the road, and nothing from this effort would indicate they shouldn't, because she was fast, no doubt about it, and just got ran down by a better horse on this day. I wouldn't be surprised if she pops up in some graded stakes sprints pretty soon here, because I liked what I saw from her.
Let's move down south to Gulfstream Park and talk about actually 4 races from their Saturday card, including a couple of stakes. The Silks Run was contested at 5 furlongs on the turf, and a minor upset here, Craig, as Yes I Am Free gets his second consecutive stakes victory going that 5 furlong distance at Gulfstream Park, as he was able to fend off Arrest Me Red, who was the big favorite for Wesley Ward, but unlike his stablemate Bound for Nowhere, who got back to the winner's circle off the layoff for Ward at the fairgrounds, not the case for Arrest Me Red, who just kind of got run off his feet going this 5 furlong distance.
Yeah, these races at Gulfstream are a little bit different. I'm not sure it's a great course for Arrest Me Red. I would expect better of him when he ships north. He had a lot of success in those New York sprints at 5.5 and 6 furlongs. I think this is just a little bit short for him, and just a little bit firmer course that's probably not up his alley. And I was really surprised by the betting in this one. I have no idea how Yes I Am Free went off 6-1 off his last race when he had run a giant speed figure that day over this course. He's just a horse who's shown some new dimensions. He used to be one who really liked to win. Well, he's always been pretty versatile, but he's won a lot of races up front, but he's able to sit off too. And just another good effort from him. And I'd be a little leery of him if he ships out, like, say, for instance, to Keeneland, because I think he just loves this Gulfstream course, but he's always going to be tough to beat there.
Yeah, I'm with you about that Gulfstream angle. It just seems like he's a horse that really has come to hand over that unique 5 furlong course at Gulfstream, where it seems like pure speed is what wins races there. And I do believe that worked against Arrest Me Red, who had a little bit of a flat-footed start, was just outrun right from the get-go. You never want to see a horse like Warrior's Pride in the race when you're Arrest Me Red, because nobody is as fast as that horse. I mean, he should be in quarter horse races. He just runs off in the early going, and even 5 furlongs is a bit too far for him at times. He really hits the wall after a half mile, and he did kind of help the race fall apart a little bit. But Yes I Am Free was sitting in the right spot to take over and gets his second consecutive stakes victory. But we'll see if this race, the form of this race, holds true moving forward.
Yeah, good point about Warrior's Pride. He's a horse. I personally love it as a guy that makes pace and speed figures, especially pace, because you know what he's going to do. And I actually think him being in the race flatters the winner a little bit, because he's able to just sit off of him, which is not always easy to do, and get the job done.
Craig, we saw a minor upset in the other stakes on Saturday Gulfstream, run right after the Silks Run. That was the Hutchison for the 3-year-olds going 6 furlongs on the dirt. And Nitrous Channel was made the 1-2 favorite here by the public, coming off that very impressive maiden victory in his career debut. But he just couldn't quite hang with the Todd Pletcher-trained Provocateur, who was breathing down his neck the entire way. It seemed like he was traveling better into the race and just took over from Nitrous Channel. And I say that favorite was just second best in this race.
Yeah, he didn't really have much of an excuse. Provocateur ran really well. He's a horse Todd Pletcher has taken his time with, and he's gotten better the last 3 starts, all the way up to a 108 TimeformUS figure here. And the pace was pretty slow. He was able to beat Nitrous Channel, despite sitting behind that one, we have some of the fractions coded in blue, actually all of them coded in blue, and I really like the way he finished. The final time figure was a 114. I got to admit, I'm not one for listening much to what trainers say. I think a lot of times they're just not all that forthright, but I would love to have a private session with Todd Pletcher and kind of ask him why in the world he started this horse going a mile on the turf first time out. And trust me, I'm not questioning Todd Pletcher. The guy's obviously the top of the sport, one of the best trainers we've ever seen. And I would imagine there was probably a good reason, but it's just interesting looking at this horse's past performances that he appears to be a dirt sprinter after starting in a turf route, and he's looking like he's going to be a very good one.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit surprising. He's actually a full brother to a horse named One Liner, who Todd Pletcher trained. I believe he won, the Southwest Stakes on the Derby Trail a number of years ago. So it's not like it's a turf pedigree. It is a little odd. This horse began his career on the turf. I find it interesting watching his last race, the Pasco, and then this race the past weekend, the Hutchison, because he's a horse that travels very well. He was traveling like a winner in the Pasco Stakes, too, back at Tampa Bay Downs. And Craig, I think you had talked about that a little bit when we were handicapping the Fountain of Youth, how the winner Mark Hamian looked like he was beaten and came back on Provocateur when just seemed like Provocateur couldn't finish off the race after it looked like he was going to go on to an easy victory that day. I guess Todd Pletcher figured out whatever was not working in the Pasco because he traveled well into the race once again, but this time he produced a finish in the stretch and was able to run past Nitrous Channel. I don't think Nitrous Channel ran badly in this race, but sometimes horses are really cranked up to fire their best efforts on debut. This horse took a lot of money when he made that first start, and he probably ran his best race that day and just didn't take a step forward here. So he was second best. I thought the fourth place finisher, American Sanctuary, is a horse that I want to keep my eye on. One that probably doesn't want to go 6 furlongs, but had some trouble last year. And I would look for him when he ultimately stretches out in distance, but he just was not good enough to go this 6 furlong sprint distance.
Yeah, and particularly given this pace, as I say, it was pretty slow, and they really finished it off. And Nitrous Channel, if you look at his final time figures, it was actually really similar. To me, it's just a case Provocateur really took a step forward in here.
There are a couple of maiden races for the 3-year-olds earlier on this Gulfstream Park card. One won by a first-time starter going a mile. That was Bright Future going out for Todd Pletcher, owned by Mike Rapoli. This is a son of Curlin who was pretty impressive winning this race, Craig. Stalked what was a moderate pace, but you had to like the way he ran away from this field in the stretch.
Yeah, and he was the other Todd Pletcher in this race. There was a different one who was bet a little more heavily, gasoline, I guess it was, which a lot of sore subject with a lot of people if you're talking price. But yeah, I liked what I saw from Bright Future. He's got one. He started out pretty well in here, and yeah, I'll be interesting to see. It's a little concerning that he got such a late start. He's certainly, I wouldn't think, a horse who we're going to see pointed towards any Triple Crown races, but he looks like one who has a promising future.
Yeah, this is a race that I believe there was a timing error. There were some times posted in the replay that seemed a little hard to believe, an extremely slow pace. There are now hand time fractions showing up in the PPs that make it seem like it was a fast pace. I guess you must have timed this one from video, Craig, to get the speed figure, but he earned a 104, which is respectable for a horse making his debut.
Yeah, I do video timing for any race that says hand time these days, whether it be Gulfstream Park or Sunland Park or any place else. I'm timing them from video if at all possible, and they run so many of these mile races at Gulfstream. They're not too tough to time. I would say the pace was moderate in here. We have actually the 3/4 and 7/8 in blue, but you can count on the figures. Despite having that T notation, basically any race that has timing problems, we're doing from video. I have a team that helps me out with that, and we are pretty much nailing them. If you see times, we're confident within, at worst, a tenth of a second in the times that we come up with.
Another maiden race from Saturday at Gulfstream Park earlier in the day was a maiden optional claiming event for the Florida breds, won by Vive Bien. And I think this is an interesting race to discuss, Craig, because this is the horse that was second at a very big price in that somewhat debated money supply maiden race from early on that Sam F. Davis card at Tampa Bay Downs. I believe it was the first race of the day. And he was the one that set a fast pace and held on for second. I'm assuming he was privately purchased out of that race because now he's trained by Safi Joseph, and he was made the 1-5 favorite here with Irad Ortiz up. We had kind of debated the speed figure for that Tampa maiden race in his debut. He did come back and repeat the number he got in your adjusted figure. I know that you kind of revised it from the original number. I think this horse originally had a 1:15 TimeformUS number, and you broke that race out to make it a 1:07. But he ran well enough here. There wasn't much behind him, though, and he just did what he had to do.
Yeah, he got a 108 speed figure after getting a 107 last time. The final time was a 103. And to me, this kind of showed, I think we're right in the ballpark on that first race. I thought he ran well. As you say, he's obviously in a different barn, but he showed those odds the first time out were definitely askew because he's a good horse. Second start, he looks like a pure sprinter. He's fast. The half mile's coated in red here, so it'll be interesting to see where he shows up, but he looks like he could be a stakes runner.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, the number for that money supply race is just proving to be accurate or too high because the other runbacks from that race, I think there have been two, have been pretty disappointing. Horses that finished farther back in the pack, though, so you wanted to see the horses that did better at that race come back, and we did see that with Vive Bien. And yeah, he got it done. It was a fast pace. He held on late. There was a big price first-time starter that was second in this race, so hard to know what was really behind him. Those that had run before didn't look like a whole lot. So we'll see how good he ultimately turns out to be. He's definitely a horse with a lot of early speed. I don't know how much the new connections paid for him, but we'll find out if it was a good investment when he tries tougher in his next start.
Yeah, and I do want to see Money Supply come back. I'm sure he's going to show up soon, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would imagine they did not like the post position that he drew when they entered him in the Tampa Bay Derby, so not a big surprise that he scratched from that race. And Chad Brown might want to stretch him out a bit more gradually than going immediately to the two turns. So yeah, I think he could still be a nice horse. We'll just see how fast he's able to run in his next start. Let's move out west to California, where they ran the Sensational Star on Sunday at Santa Anita, going down the hill, 6.5 furlongs on the turf. And Craig, I was a little surprised to see Brickyard Ride show up in this race. I think we've been surprised by the last couple of spots for this horse as they ran him a mile around two turns on the dirt, now turning back to the one turn on the turf down the hill. But just seems like this horse is fast on any surface at any distance.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed after that last two-turn race when he blitzed the field. I was hoping to see him back there, but with this horse, it just doesn't seem to matter. He goes fast, and if he makes the lead, the race is over. And he backed it up again here with a 122 TimeformUS speed figure. He was able to do it from the inside, which is not always easy going down the hill. But when you have his kind of running style, it probably post position doesn't matter much. So I don't want to give him any extra credit for it. He just always runs his race. Sprint, apparently route now, dirt, turf, doesn't matter. But the one warning with this horse is he does have to make the lead, as we've talked about before.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, we were talking about that being true with Nashville, and it's the same thing with this horse. He needs to be out on a clear lead to have his best chance to win. When he has somebody that contests the pace along with him or takes the lead away from him, that's typically when Brickyard Ride does not show up. But now a few starts in a row, he's been able to get that trip where he's able to get out to the front by himself. And Craig, I would say the fact that he's shown this versatility to do it going a mile, to do it on the turf, it gives him and the connection some more options because you're more likely to get that clear lead sometimes in turf races that don't feature quite as much speed or in 1 mile races where there typically aren't 6 furlong sprinters like Brickyard Ride signed on for those races. So I think that we could see this horse branch out a little bit more in the future.
Yeah, I would imagine next time he's got to show up with a two-turn turf race just to kind of complete the circuit. But we'll see. His trainer certainly has a lot of options with this guy.
The race that took place right after Brickyard Ride won the Sensational Star was an allowance race on the turf for the fillies and mares going the mile and an eighth distance, and this was won pretty impressively by the John Sadler trained Park Avenue, actually a horse that was making her turf debut in this race, and she was a good dirt horse, but she's clearly a better turf horse based on this performance.
Yeah, that's at first I was trying to figure out why you wanted to talk about this race. I mean, it got a good figure. She ran a 116 in here. But then I realized it was her first turf race. I'll let you talk more about the breeding, but certainly seems like it was the right decision. She's been running on dirt. She's, as you said, she had won a couple races in a row with low 100 type speed figures. And then she moved into graded stakes. And I'm not sure she had the... she just wasn't good enough to handle some of those horses we saw, but she certainly looked like a new animal on the turf course. She was able to set a moderate pace and just won easily. So good effort from her for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those races that I was impressed by visually. I would say the 2 3/4 length margin of victory, it doesn't do the visual justice. I mean, she was so much the best in this race. You could see early on she was traveling so well. Like you said, she got a moderate pace to set, but the runner-up in this race closed from last place, so I'm not sure that it was a total merry-go-round affair. And coming into the stretch, I mean, she really opened up on this field. She had a nice kick, what you want to see from a turf horse when they're making their turf debut, that they have that turn of foot to run away from the field, and she displayed that. And to me, I mean, she won this race pretty easily, so I would imagine they'll step her right back up into stakes on the turf, and I'd be interested to see how she does, because sometimes this turf division for the fillies and mares out in Southern California, it's not always the toughest, especially when there are no East Coast shippers. The races can be a little hungry at times, so a horse like this that has a breakout effort in an allowance race can step up right into the graded stakes company and perhaps be competitive. So she's one that I would look for in a race like that next time.
Oh, for sure. It's a kind of speed figure we see win grade 2s and grade 3s out in California pretty regularly. So, and this was not the easy, it wasn't like there was a bunch of slouches in here. This was a good, solid allowance field. I guess the disappointment had to be Midnight Dioro. She was a horse who was actually on the Kentucky Oaks Trail a couple years ago, and some people's winter favorite for that race, I want to say. But she just hasn't developed, didn't really take the turf. This was her first turf try, so not sure what's next for that one.
Let's finish things up on the podcast by talking about the stakes from Turfway last Saturday. The Queen Stakes, won by Caravel, who's known best as a turf sprint specialist, but she transitioned to the Tapeta surface here. And Craig, I think that a race like this, it's synthetic racing at its best, because we see a turf horse running against a dirt horse on a surface that's somewhat foreign to both of them, but they both showed up with good efforts, as Caravel was able to beat the runner-up Club Car, a horse that does her best running on the dirt. And I think they both showed up with pretty good efforts here. Caravel, a horse that I think was making her first start for some new connections in this race, going out for Brad Cox.
Yeah, Caravel, we hadn't actually seen her, I believe, since the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, where she ran a distant last after contesting the pace set by Golden Pal. But yeah, she ran a good race here, got a 1:15 TimeformUS speed figure. She was able to get the best of the dirt horse. I will say a lot of times people just assume that turf form is going to transfer to synthetics, but in my opinion, that's not really always the case. You just never know, especially in sprints. A lot of times it's the dirt horse, but Caravel had some previous history running on synthetics, had done really well at Presque Isle in the past, so she had that form and was able to get it done pretty easily here. And a 1:15 is nothing to sneeze at. I would imagine they're going to look to get her back on the turf really soon, though, as there's not a lot of opportunities on this synthetic surfaces.
Yeah, I haven't seen any reporting about this. I saw that they had purchased her, these new connections had purchased her at auction at the end of last year for $500,000. I would imagine mostly as a broodmare prospect. So we'll see if they're going to breed her, or if they have bred her, or if she's going to continue running as a 5-year-old. I don't know about any of that. But I think she's a horse, Craig, that they just got a little bit too ambitious with last year. I mean, she had won some races in the summer at Saratoga against her own gender and looked good doing it, but to transfer immediately into those races at the grade 1 level against males, I think she didn't have the speed figures that suggested she was quite good enough to make that jump, and she just got overbet in some tougher spots. And I imagine if they set their sights a little bit lower this year, they'll have more success with her.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know we were both pretty mystified when she went to Woodbine. I want to say she went off 2-5 or 3-5 against older male horses that day, and yeah, I mean she's older as herself as well, but yeah, it just didn't make a lot of sense. And even after that, they persisted trying a couple more times. So this was obviously a more reasonable spot, and there's no lack of possibilities, possible races to run in for turf filly sprinters. So there's no shame in being really good in that division. You can make a lot of money there.
Well, that's it for our race recaps on this Pacecast. Craig and I, of course, will be back later in the week to do the TimeformUS forecast. And Craig, I think we were just talking a little bit before we recorded. We're very likely to do that Fairgrounds card on Saturday, which features the Louisiana Derby, their final prep for the Kentucky Derby. As always, Fairgrounds is offering an all-stakes late pick 5 sequence, so I think we'll dissect that. I took a brief look at it earlier today. There are some familiar names on it that last ran on that Risen Star card, so we'll be able to assess them. And also the return of Echo Zulu, as she's going to make her 3-year-old debut in her prep for the Kentucky Oaks, presumably, if she runs well.
Yeah, one thing I like, I talk about it often, is the Fairgrounds draws their cards early. I think they've actually been out since Saturday, so we have plenty of time to handicap that one. And there's also Derby and Oaks Point races at Sunland Park on Sunday, and those are also available. So I'm a big fan of these places that draw early, so plenty of time to dig in.
Yes, we'll definitely look forward to that a little bit later in the week. Remember that you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast later in the week.